In 1960, ABC, the smaller of the three major US networks, took a risk by programming 3 animated programs in their primetime lineup, including the novel idea of an original animated sitcom aimed primarily at an adult audience, The Flintstones. While ABC's innovation would be a huge popular success, leading to television's biggest boom in primetime animation, the end result of the Flintstones' success would be to drive cartoons out of primetime for almost 3 decades. This is the story of the birth of television cartoons and the subsequent rise of primetime animation. How the Flintstones walked so that the Simpsons could run, and how its success relegated all rivals to the graveyard of Saturday morning cartoons. 1948 saw the beginning of the end of the old Hollywood studio system and its golden age. Throughout the 1930s and 1940s, animated film shorts were a vital part of most film bills, with studios providing their own shorts or distributing cartoons from independent producers. And although cartoons were not profitable themselves, they were part of the whole package that film studios offered to moviegoers. In light of declining cinema attendance, studios reallocated their priorities towards large-budget A pictures throughout the 1950s. And since cartoons had traditionally not been a source of direct studio income, they were one of the primary areas studios could trim to remain economically viable. Not only did these shutdowns make film animation scarce, but they also resulted in a number of out-of-work animators seeking employment through the new avenue of television production. One of the few profitable activities for animation studios in the 1950s was selling vintage shorts to television. Disney pioneered the use of animation on television through its anthology series Disneyland in 1954 on ABC, and other cartoon studios followed suit by selling their pre-1948 libraries to television in the mid-1950s. Around this time, a number of animators began experimenting with original animation for television, an option that had long been viewed as economically unfeasible, as the production costs for typical animation were far too exorbitant to be justified for the still uncertain television market. The 1950s saw the rise of a new technique called limited animation, which minimized and repeated motions to decrease the number of drawings required and therefore reduce costs. The earliest pioneer of limited animation for television was Jay Ward, who created Crusader Rabbit for syndication in 1949. Crusader was an extreme example of bargain basement production, as it reduced movements to an average of only 1 per 4 seconds. This technique was most heralded in the work of theatrical animation studio UPA and their 1950 short Gerald McBoing Boing, and more typical was Hanna-Barbera's debut program, The Rough and Ready Show. Both Crusader Rabbit and Rough and Ready exemplify a number of shifts in animated form that would become typical for television productions. Minimal visual variety, emphasis on dialogue and verbal humor, and repetitive situations and narratives. Bill Hanna and Joseph Barbera were former MGM animators who popularized the Tom and Jerry series, but found themselves out of work following MGM's animation shutdown in 1957. Rather than join another studio and possibly experience a similar fate, Hanna and Barbera opened their own studio. The name was determined by the flip of a coin. Seeing the potential of animation for the television market, they pitched their services by adapting UPA's style of limited animation. However, instead of UPA's modernist graphic style, Hanna-Barbera offered a pared-down visual style, emphasizing dialogue, sound effects, and repetitive motion. With Screen Gems as its distributor, Hanna-Barbera began producing The Rough and Ready Show for NBC in 1957. They followed Rough and Ready with a syndicated program sponsored by Kellogg's, 1958's The Huckleberry Hound Show. While Kellogg's was certainly aiming at a children's audience in lucrative late afternoon time slots, the show transcended its target audience, with various surveys done at the time suggesting that anywhere between 40 and 65% of Huckleberry's audience were adults. Hanna-Barbera's next syndicated program was equally popular with adults, satirizing popular westerns with Quick Draw McGraw in 1959. The breakout success of these programs led to the biggest boom of cartoons in television history, and the immediate success of Hanna-Barbera's original television animation led to an overhaul of what animation would look and sound like for years to come. The assumption among animation scholars and fans today is that this shift was for the worst. The limited animation style of television killed off the classic animation of Warner Brothers and MGM, with only Disney carrying the torch into their feature film work. While this argument might be maintained on aesthetic grounds, the initial reception of these early television cartoons suggests that they were not objects of adult derision. Rather, the early Hanna-Barbera programs were held up as valued advances in animation that were more entertaining for adults and children than the studio shorts that we now regard as classic. Critics hailed characters like Huckleberry Hound, Quickjaw McGraw, and Yogi Bear for their adult wit and satirical content. The puns, malapropisms, and old jokes that seem stale today made Hanna-Barbera cartoons appear groundbreaking in their generational appeal. This goal of reaching both the child and adult audience was achieved not through creating unified cartoons with universal appeals, but by specifically aiming the visuals and wacky sound effects at children and the dialogue at adults. Programs that had long been condemned for dumbing down animation were viewed at the time as actually broadening the genre's appeal through intelligence and sophistication. John Mitchell, vice president at Screen Gems, suggested that Hanna-Barbera develop a cartoon aimed at adults, and this soon gave rise to the development of the Flintstones. The established networks CBS and NBC were unwilling to support the idea of animation in primetime and turned down the program as being too novel. However, for ABC, the fledgling third network, this program seemed to be something that would work. The Flintstones fit ABC's strategy of airing novelty and counter-programming, such as Disney programs and Western series. On Friday, 30th September 1960, the Flintstones premiered opposite CBS's Route 66 and NBC's The Westerner. The Flintstones defied nearly all established conventions of animated television. The show was formally structured like a sitcom, complete with single half-hour narrative episodes, suburban settings, domestic plots, and even a laugh track, deriving primary character and situational inspiration from various sitcoms of the time, but particularly The Honeymooners. The program was Hanna-Barbera's attempt to capitalize on the adult audiences for their syndicated programs, and ABC primarily targeted an adult audience as well. The show was initially sponsored by Miles Labs and R.J. Reynolds, until parental protests in 1961 that the show was selling cigarettes to children forced the latter to withdraw. The 8:30 p.m. Eastern time slot was later than typical for child-oriented programs, and the trade press clearly indicated that ABC and Hanna-Barbera were primarily aiming at adults with the show. The show was a surprise success, finishing the season at number 18 in the overall Nielsen ratings and giving ABC a rare non-Western hit, while critics gave the program mixed reviews. Some enjoyed the show's satirical jabs at suburbia and the sitcom format, while others found the humor obvious and the situations contrived. 1 month later, on October 11, ABC debuted another animated show during prime time, The Bugs Bunny Show, an anthology series hosted by Bugs Bunny and mainly composed of theatrical Looney Tunes and Merry Melodies cartoons released by Warner Brothers from 1948 up to that point. And The Bugs Bunny Show aired on Tuesdays at 7:30 p.m. Ironically, reviewers of The Bugs Bunny Show assumed the show was solely aimed at a child audience, despite the fact that the shorts featured on the program were designed for mass consumption in movie theaters, while The Flintstones was viewed as more adult-oriented, primarily because it drew upon the cultural assumptions of the more adult, family-friendly genre of the sitcom. Through genre mixing, The Flintstones was able to establish more prestige and legitimacy than cartoon shorts. The success of The Flintstones led to television's first animation boom, bringing a variety of subject matters and settings to both primetime and Saturday morning cartoons. As is often the case, the success of one genre, format, or gimmick led to the placement of many similar programs on network schedules, and the success of The Flintstones was no exception. 8 animated shows aired in primetime during the next 2 years. However, no other series matched the success of the Flintstones, and most lasted only a season before being moved to Saturday morning. ABC tried to strike gold again with 2 primetime animated sitcoms during its next season, Hanna-Barbera's Top Cat, which ran for 1 season, and Calvin and the Colonel, which was cancelled after just 2 months due to poor ratings. The 2 other networks tried their hand at primetime animation in 1961 as well. NBC signed The Bullwinkle Show, which aired in color on Sunday evenings at 7 p.m. in competition with the black and white Lassie on CBS. Although the program garnered acceptable ratings against Lassie, it was no match for the highly rated program and was moved to Sunday afternoons during its second season. CBS offered The Alvin Show, based upon the 1958 hit novelty record by Alvin and the Chipmunks, on Wednesday evenings. The Alvin Show was up against the new Steve Allen Show on ABC and Wagon Train on NBC, but was no match for Wagon Train, the number 1 program for the 1961 to 1962 season, and was relegated to Saturday mornings, where it lasted 3 more seasons. ABC kept both Bugs Bunny and the Flintstones in primetime, and renamed Mattie's Fun Day Funnies in winter 1962 to The Beanie and Cecil Show. For the 1961 to 1962 season, networks programmed 7 animated series in primetime, a record showing for the cartoon genre. As mentioned, this boom was in keeping with the general programming trend of the 1960s, which led to a strategy termed innovation, imitation, saturation, whereby one successful groundbreaker begets clones that eventually clutter the schedule to such a degree that the formula quickly dies through overexposure, a pattern which also played out for westerns in the late 1950s and spy programs in the mid-1960s. The saturation phase of the cartoon boom was surprisingly quick in coming. The Flintstones was the only primetime cartoon from 1961 which remained in primetime by 1963. Other cartoons attempted to take hold in primetime in subsequent seasons, including Hanna-Barbera's The Jetsons on ABC in 1962 and The Adventures of Johnny Quest, also on ABC in 1964. As well as UPA's The Famous Adventures of Mr. Magoo on NBC that same year, but none lasted more than 1 season in primetime. All of these cartoons were met with a critical scorn, typical for derivative clones of previous successes in all genres. Cartoons disappeared from primetime because of their perceived inability to reach adult audiences. Although certainly the boom waned because of the typical effects of generic saturation, the industry took the failure to mean that the genre was inappropriate for adults. And this assumption about the audience appeals of animation helped to form the shape of genre for decades to come. The Flintstones lasted in primetime until 1966. The end of the Flintstones' primetime run marked the last network primetime cartoon for over 30 years, and it would not be until The Simpsons premiered on Fox in 1989 that an animated series would once again appear during primetime. A scene from the 1992 Halloween episode of The Simpsons included a stroll through a darkened cemetery. Among the names on the tombstones were Fish Police, Capital Critters, and Family Dog, all of which were primetime animated shows that premiered following the success of The Simpsons and which were subsequently cancelled after extremely brief runs. Were we to stroll through a cemetery in Bedrock, we may notice such names as Calvin and the Colonel, Top Cat, The Bullwinkle Show, and Johnny Quest. Of course, some of these shows were more successful than others, but there could only be one trailblazer, and none of these shows broke more ground in prime time than the Flintstones, which, like The Simpsons, appeared on a fledgling network that was trying to distinguish itself through counter-programming strategies. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. Please like this video if you learned something today, and let us know down in the comments what other similarities you notice between the Flintstones and the Simpsons, and also which other Hanna-Barbera cartoons you feel has aged well. Remember to subscribe for more content like this, and feel free to share this video with friends and family. I'll be back again soon, so until then, stay safe and stay tuned for more cartoon history.